It's now time to bring you our interview segment on the show. Today we'll be looking at Nigeria's export base and how to improve on export promotion initiatives in the country. I have with me via Skype Olori Boye-Ajayi as she brings us now some much more insight into the sector. Good to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me, David. Good morning.
Now, let's start first and foremost with, from your own perspective as a key player in the export sector. At the end of the day, the impact of the COVID-19 has been far-reaching, devastating. But in terms of our volume and the way forward now, what's your take on that?
Honestly, we really have to start looking at abandoned, schemes and if you call it funds that have been set aside for the, non-oil sector. Before now, the Nigeria Export Promotion Council had the Export Development Fund, we had the Export Expansion Grant, we had the Export Adjustment Scheme Fund. I think this is a good time for us to look at how we can, one, increase that fund, look at a way of institutionalizing these schemes, because we've come to a critical point where we have to move beyond just saying we have a fund, we have a scheme for inclusiveness for the women, and also looking at funds for those who say they want to export out of the country. So I think it's a good time to revisit some of these schemes and these funds.
And one of the critical issues you just raised right now is inclusiveness of women. The part of inclusion seems to lag behind at the end of the day. Now, across the key value chains, first and foremost, looking at our production capacity and what we are producing now, women involvement is quite low. And then exporting as well, we see quite a low level in that regard as well. What are the bottlenecks, the challenges that affect women's participation within the production lines as well as export?
Well, a few things, David. So you might find that women are, to some extent, they have the cultural issues surrounding, I have to have a baby. And also women tend not to have good education as opposed to the boy child, even, with men. And I think there's honestly, on the part of the women, some sort of fear. And I don't know what it is. Women tend not to get loans because they don't want to owe. Women tend to engage less in international trade. So there's also some part on the women themselves, but then there's the societal, the bottleneck that you mentioned, which is mainly around education. They're not as educated, they're not as informed, they don't have the knowledge. Men tend to be more focused on, getting the networks and using them to their advantage, while women tend to use the networks for just networking. So there's a lot of difference in how they use what they have. But I think it's a great time for women to get into export, because we've seen, according to research, that women in businesses that export tend to have better livelihoods. They can get more people employed, they have more money to play with when it comes to disposable and, of course, income for the family, and all those wonderful things that are attributed to exporting. So I think for women to be in export at a time like this is not just empowering for them, but for their families and, of course, the communities that they belong to.
Now, at this point in time, information is key, and for so many women, going into the export business still seems like a Herculean task, or they're not pretty much aware of how to go about the business, how to go about getting information, and also make it a thriving business where they can increase their contribution to the society and in the scope of business. So now, how critical is it for women to break down that layer where there's a mirage of lack of information?
Well, at this time, I honestly think that women cannot say that they don't have the information, right? Because the internet has done a very good job of almost leveling out everybody in that you can access the information. But beyond that information, it's that you have to belong to the right network. For export, because it's such, it's not, in my opinion, not yet understood by many. I think it's important that you belong to the right group that not only will provide you with the knowledge, but will handhold you through the process of going into international trade. So you have several across Nigeria that are doing a fantastic job of pushing the women, into exporting, because that is really what we need. It's good for growth, it's good for our society, of course, and it's good for the woman and her family. But I think these groups are where we should focus on pushing more women into at this critical time.
Let's still focus on information. At the end of the day now, looking at the number of regional policies we have across the region in West Africa and going across the continent as well in terms of bilateral agreements, there are so many pursuits to still explore. But at the end of the day, we still know the government still has a whole lot more to do in that regard. Now, the onus lies on individuals to also take up this challenge and do much more. If the government is not necessarily doing enough, then we have to take the bull by the horn.
So the government right now needs to focus on, as I would like to say, trade policy and infrastructure. So I noticed that we usually have monetary, we have fiscal policy, but trade policy tends to be almost underplayed. And those three, in my opinion, go hand in hand. For the infrastructure to really kick in, the policies have to be there to uphold them and to make them really, go across borders. So in a lot of things that the government is doing, we are just wanting them to almost create the enabling environment for us, the players, to be able to compete globally. And if that's not in place, competing globally becomes a problem, because one man, one woman trying to export in such a wide sector may never work. It may never even have the sort of impact we want it to have on our global on our economy here in Nigeria. So I think that what we're looking for is the players taking their own part, but the government ensuring that everybody in that system, in that sector, has what they need to compete globally. That now has to do with tariffs, customs, just ensuring that all those things don't give us, choke us and make us want to jump off that wagon of exporting.
And talking about global competitiveness, at the end of the day, we also have to look at the topic of value addition, fine-tuning what we're churning out and taking out of the shores of Nigeria. Be it in agriculture, we still have to do much more. Be it in fashion, be it in other services and allied areas, we still have to do much more. What's your take on value addition, especially at this point in time where we are looking towards a recovery and bouncing back stronger?
That's part of what you just asked, which is, what can the government do? That is one of the things that I believe at this time the government can help the players in that industry do, which is, one, beyond us, exporting raw materials, we need things to help us process. We need service providers. We need those who will refine what we're doing as players, but they may not be able to afford it. So I know right now the Bank of Industry has done a good job in providing, loans. I know that even CBN has sort of put the AGMIS loan and all those wonderful initiatives, but we need more. That's just the truth. We need more at this time in order for us to add value to what we're producing. There's no better time for us to do that. And in order for us to compete globally, we must be able to compete in price. With the African Continental Trade Agreement, area agreement, we need all of these things in place before we can start saying we want to compete even within Africa. Because if that's not in place, then you will see that this may favor some people and may not favor others like ourselves in Nigeria, because we don't have the infrastructure to actually, add value to those things that we're producing as a nation.
So would you tally with those who are of the perception that Nigeria is not doing enough in terms of meeting local demands, and so we're not necessarily prepared for export?
I don't agree, because every economy has import and export. That's not going to change. However, what we might want to consider is, why is Nigeria, for example, under the AGOA initiative, utilizing it so low? Like, why are we performing so low in that area? If our other African countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, Mauritius are using this particular initiative to boost their economy, why should we just focus on local demand and not on export if it can do our economy some good? So at the end of the day, I think it's what's good for the economy. Export is great for every economy, especially in Africa. So yes, we may not have what it takes, but is it good for us? Absolutely.
And SMEs still remain the engine of growth, and we know women participation in that regard is also quite critical. But at this point in time now, the little bits that we have to work towards to looking at how skill acquisition is critical, especially with emergent sectors of the economy that we are having at this point in time. The global space is evolving quite fast and we cannot play catch up. So in terms of skill acquisition now, what's your word as well to the entirety of the value chain within the export base to do much more?
So I'm sure you might be aware of the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment wanting to start the Nigerian Foreign Trade Academy. I think that's one of the amazing initiatives that will help us become globally competitive. Even locally, it will have knock-on effects because you can't train someone, on trade in a local context and it won't benefit them at some point. So I think that having those sort of initiative schemes, like I said at the beginning, is what we need to pump more into the economy. And also, I might add that there should be focus on services, exporting our services. That's also one of the areas that I think is very much undervalued, very much overlooked, but it can absolutely add to our, economy's GDP, even if we say that the skills level is low and all of that. But with these, the NFTA, I think it's also a good way to start looking at revamping that industry.
And lastly, the nuggets made in Nigeria goods, how much of a patronage do you think would have in terms of your forecast?
We might not have a choice. A lot more people are going to be buying locally because of the restrictions in importing and, of course, the devaluation of the naira and all those things that come with why most people tend to, or why an economy sort of looks inwards. But I think that we're going to have a lot more companies sort of taking advantage of having people having to buy locally. And then we're going to have a sort of rise in people buying the more premium goods. So what you find is, okay, if I can't buy cornflakes abroad anymore, I'm not going to buy Nasco, no offense to them, but they might say, give me that sort of middle ground, right, between Kellogg's and Nasco. So there are very much opportunities for companies to take advantage of that sort of middle class demand.
Well, we just hope that at the end of the day we see a stronger recovery within the export sector of the economy, and indigenous players just have to assert themselves in the market. It's just too big for Nigeria to play sleeping giant. Thank you very much for your time today on the show, Olori Boye-Ajayi. Thank you very much once again.